I was born in Taiwan, and then I went to university in north part of Taiwan. And when I was in the university, uh, we have to have, sorry, we have to have military service. So right after I got finished the entrance exam, I was drafted into the military service for three months. And then in the junior years of our undergraduate study, during the summer, we have to serve 3 months in military school. And during that time, we have some instance in military school, and then there were some people, some students who were protesting, and that put our life in jeopardy during that time. And that was the first time that I was seriously thinking about how corrupt the government was. Okay, this was back in around 1968, 1969. As a matter of fact, as I remember, it was 1969. And then, but I didn't really have that bad of impression at that time, even though I was very dissatisfied with the way they handled the situation. And then after I graduated from the...
What did they do?
Pardon me?
What did they do with the book? Why was your life in danger?
It's a long story. Basically what happened was there were some students didn't go back to the school in time, and they got caught trying to sneak in. And so what happened was so they punished everyone, just because we are college students. And then when they punish everyone, and there's some students complain about it. And so that night, that evening, there were about 20 officers came in with guns and beating some of our students. About 30 students got beaten up pretty badly. So we protest, and when we protest, the officers say whoever protests is going to be in serious trouble. And finally, we organized. At that time, there were some students they want to organize the whole thing. So we were thinking about having a hunger strike. And then during that time, that was under the rule of Chiang Kai-shek. And they say, well, if you people did that, and you would be executed. And they used that to threaten us. And well, at that time, what happened was their students say, well, no matter what, I mean, we got to protest, we got to give them the message. And then what happened was during that time, so we start the hunger strike during the lunch hour. And then the president of the school told us, well, the government has already known that we're going to have a hunger strike, and they told us this how serious it can be. So after that, they just call our name one by one and force us to eat. And and that's how it was ended. But then that right before we were discharged, then there were about 2 or 3 college students on campus, and was beaten up badly by about 300 or 400 professional students. I mean, professional military students. And so, but we couldn't do anything because at that time they said, well, whoever is going to get involved in this will be, put in jail or something, and they will be court-martialed. So ends up, nobody did anything, and we left the school. That was my first impression about how corrupt the KMT government was. And then when I graduated from my undergraduate school, and I was drafted into Matsu. That was an island just right off the coast of China. And during that time, and I was an engineering officer, and I have seen a lot of corruptions, and especially how the senior officers, they use the construction to make money for themselves, and basically I try to do things that was right, but then one evening, my commander, asked me to go to his office in the evening, and then he gave me a really hard time. And since that, I had a very bad impression about KMT. Okay, and then I decided, well, when I go over to the United States, I may not want to come back to Taiwan because of political situations. At that time, I was a civil engineer. I was working for, and then I thought about how corrupt it could be to be a civil engineer. So I decided to change the field to mechanical engineering. And so when I went to the United States in 1972, I started with working a master's degree in civil engineering.
Wait, hold on. What did you try to do that you thought was right, and why did your boss give you a hard time?
Well, there was actually I cannot talk too much about that because because that was a secret of the military during that time. But it involves a construction project, and there was some money got involved, and basically the commander wanted me not to handle the money. Well, actually, it's just a paper coming over. They would ask our unit to withdraw some money, because of construction money. And he asked me not to handle the situation, just give him the paperwork and let him do it himself. And I thought that was not right because it was my duty to propose how we're going to distribute the money. So I went ahead and wrote the proposal and then distribute to all different units and tells them how the money is going to be distributed. And then he knew about it. He was very angry about it. To say I was not supposed to handle a situation like that. Just give him the paperwork and let him do it himself, and which is completely wrong. And that was what.
What do you think he was going to try to do with the paperwork?
What he was trying to do is the paperwork. He is going to ask to the financial officer and just use that work, and he's going to write something, and then he's going to withdraw money for himself. I think that's what he was going to do. And, I mean, he can look at my proposal. If the proposal is not what he wants, he could just say, no, this is not what I want, and this unit should have so much money, the other unit should have so much money, or something like that. But he didn't do that. Instead, he just during midnight he asked me to go to his office, and then he just yelled at me for doing my job, basically what it was.
Okay. So when you got to the United States.
Okay, when I went to the United States, I started with my master's degree in civil engineering, and during that time, I had there were Taiwanese what we call Taiwanese organizations, and there's also an organization on campus called Chinese Student Association, but most Taiwanese students do not identify themselves with Chinese Student Association. And so we didn't go to Chinese Student Association, but then I was elected to be a Taiwanese Student Association's, well, at that time it was not called Taiwanese Student Association, just the Taiwanese Association. As president. And then there was a KMT agent came over and told me he would like to he want me to sublet his apartment for a summer, and so I went ahead and then paid 3 months rent. And after I paid for the rent, and he came back, he said he wanted to go to New York to work, but then he came back in a week with his girlfriend, and he tried to force me to move. And I told him no, I wouldn't, because I paid the rent. And but he went in, he moved in anyway. And then he started, tape recording whatever I say about political situation. He acts like he said he was a communist, like Mao Zedong and things like that. So actually he was I think he was a KMT agent. And then basically what happened was he even show me some of the things, regarding how to run an organization for Taiwanese Association. But then the reason I found out was at that time in 1976, my sister went to United States with a band to celebrate 200 to the bicentennial celebration for United States independence. And then at the time my sister was in Colorado, I was in Oklahoma, so I drove my car over to Colorado to see my sister. But when I came back, basically this guy took all my stuff out to a yard and let the rain ruin all my books and everything. And so I had a quarrel with him. And then after that, and he threatened me. He said, "Well, do you know who I am? I'm a KMT agent, and you will be in trouble. Okay, I mean, don't think about going back to Taiwan. If you go back to Taiwan, you will be murdered. You'll be either murdered or be picked up by the military police." So that was the reason I was afraid to go back to Taiwan for almost. I didn't go to. I went to the United States in 1972. I was afraid to go to Taiwan, and then in 1980 I had to come back to Taiwan to get my permanent residency in the United States. So at that time I told my family that I would like to go to Canada instead of go to Taiwan for the interview. But then finally they told me, well, maybe it's okay to come back. Don't be afraid. So I went back. So I went back to Taiwan in 1980. But during that time I was still very. I was scared, very scared, right? Because what happened was after I had a quarrel with this guy, this agent, my father in Taiwan received a letter from a Taiwanese independent movement, okay, from the United States, and that letter basically was had something to do like try to promote Taiwan independence. During that was during 1976, and there was a time KMT was still in power, and so my father turned it in anyway. So my father didn't get into trouble. But if my father had not turned in that document, I think the reason my father received the newsletter from independence movement in the United States was because I had a fight with this KMT agent. So this KMT agent tried to use that to frame my father, and one of my father's friends suggested to him that he should turn in a newsletter to the government immediately, in order to being framed. So that's what my father did. He just turned into the document to the government and say I had nothing to do with this organization, and that's why he was not picked up, and he still had his job.
Okay. So how was your return trip to Taiwan back in 1980?
Okay, back in 1980, I was cautious, and I didn't have any problem except when at the time I need to apply for exit permit, and during the exit permit they told me there would be about one or 2 weeks delayed. So actually there was 2 weeks delayed, and they didn't give me any reason for it. So, but at that time I was a little bit scared, but it ends up there was nothing to be scared of. It was just 2 weeks delayed. So after I went back to the United States, and then everything was okay. And then basically the KMT agent was very active in the United States until Professor Ching was murdered in 1981. And because the U.S. Congress had an inquiry regarding Professor Ching's death, so that more or less has put a stop on KMT agents. But then in 1984, when Henry Liu was murdered, KMT was basically they were cut. They were cut with evidence, and so that was the main reason why Taiwan became a democratic country. because KMT they have evidence that KMT was involved in the murder in the murder of Henry Ru, Mr. Ru, and that was the beginning of the process of democracy in Taiwan.
Why would them getting caught with evidence of that murder lead to democracy?
There were three organized crime people went to San Francisco and murdered Mr. Ru. At that time, Mr. Ru was thinking about writing a book, and then what happened was KMT sent those three persons to the United States to San Francisco and murdered him in his house. But then before they left United States, they give FBI a tape, and they have a confession to FBI on that tape, and also there were things that they mentioned in the tape. But the United States Congress used that tape as leverage to ask President Chang, okay, not to have his family member to take over, his presidency, after he stepped down. So that was, I think, the major reason why KMT stepped down, why Taiwan has a democracy, was basically because of the help of this tape, and because of the help of U.S. Congress and the Senate.
But how can they, are you saying Jiang Jingguo let an opposition party form legally because the United States had this evidence against it?
It has something to do with that tape, I think. I don't know what's in that tape, but there's something to do with that tape.
But how can the United States force or use that to promote democracy here?
Well, you have to remember that during 1985, 86, the Philippines has already started democracy process, and because Marcos was a very corrupt man too, and U.S. Congress was putting a pressure on Marcos to have a fair election, and this instance in 1984 it's similar to Aquino's situations in the Philippines. So United States at that time, I think United States did the right thing. Okay, try to force those countries who are under dictatorship to become democratic countries. And so in the process, the Taiwanese people, all the American people and all the American Congress, the favor for helping the Taiwanese people to achieve democracy.
So you think that's why Jiang Jingguo finally...
that was a major factor, I think, because under KMT's history, that was the only instance that they cover, that there's solid evidence regarding their brutality. Mm-hmm. Okay, and before that, there was no, it was just always rumors and always say, well, even the 228 instance in 1947, the only book that wrote about 228 was by Mr. George Kerr. It was published in 1965, and the book was banned in Taiwan during that time. And so there was, all over the world, everybody thought, well, Chiang Kai-shek and Jiang Jingguo are good leaders, okay? But because there's no solid evidence of corruption, there's no solid evidence of brutality. And this instance, 1984, that was the only time that the United States has solid evidence regarding their brutality. As a matter of fact, I think President Truman knew about how corrupt Chiang Kai-shek's family was. He during one instant, he even say Chiang Kai-shek's family are just thieves, because during right after World War II, during that time, United States give help Chiang Kai-shek try to rebuild China, and then the part of money just went to Mexico because they used to buy lands and buy a mansion in Mexico. And President Truman even made a comment, say they're just thief. Okay, and so, but there's no solid evidence during that time. So it's just all rumors.
Okay, so could you comment really quickly on what you think of the KMT today? If they had won the 2004 election, do you think they would resort to some of these measures again, or because I'm just wondering what you think, because this country is no longer under martial law. Some people seem to believe that they would resort to some of these violent and brutal measures, but I'm just wondering what you would think if they had come back into power in this election.
Okay, since Taiwanese people has already been accustomed to the democracy process, so I don't think even KMT come back to power, I don't think they can be as brutal as before. But what most people are afraid of was because now China is getting involved in these things. In Shanghai, KMT even have the campaign office in Shanghai, even though everybody knows China want to take over Taiwan. Okay, they have more than 4,000 missiles targeting Taiwan right now, but KMT's candidates basically ignore all those facts and try to instead of standing up against China's threat, they would just say, well, we want our people to go to China and being nice to them. And that was one of the reasons some Taiwanese people are afraid of KMT to return to power, because they were thinking, as a matter of fact, some, especially there were some KMT officials, they will allow a Chinese flag to fly in Taiwan, but they wouldn't allow their own flag. I think that during a time when there was I forgot what it was, but there was something to do with a sporting event, and then there were Taiwanese people. This was in Taipei. Some Taiwanese people want to use Republic of China's flag to go into the stadium, but then the mayor of Taipei, Mr. Ma, he wouldn't allow people to have flag for Republic of China instead, but then he allowed people to have flag from People's Republic of China. So and that gave a little bit impression that the KMT, actually is trying to have connections with People's Republic of China, and that's what people are afraid of KMT to take over. The other thing was regarding the candidacy. Well, everyone knows the vice president candidate.
Everyone knows that.
Okay, they were afraid. Well, actually, his son are American citizen. They're afraid. During the campaign in year 2000, he said, well, he want to have a peace talk with China, and there'll be 30 years of peace with China, and then after 30 years, they basically just let them take over. Well, his son are American citizen, and he could go to, he can go to the United States anytime he wants, but then he wants 30-year peace treaty with China, and then after 30 years, then they will give the sovereignty of Taiwan to China, and that's what people are afraid of, because that means he could sell out Taiwan easily. So, so that was the reason a lot of people are afraid of KMT taking over.
You think Chong Sui made a deal with China to give the sovereignty of the country over to them in 30 years?
Well, during the campaign in year 2000, uh, well, he's not KMT. He's a People First Party. Okay, now he came up with KMT during the campaign 2004. But in year 2000, he indicated he wants to sign a 30 years peace treaty with China, and after 30 years, then he would surrender the sovereignty of Taiwan to China. That was his campaign message, his campaign policy in year 2000. Well, in year 2004, he campaigned as a vice president, but he didn't say the same thing. But people thought that was what he was going to do. And the president's candidate, Mr. Dr. Lin, he said he's not going to talk about sovereignty issues. Okay, I mean, for a lot of people in Taiwan, sovereignty issue is an important issue, because if we don't talk about sovereignty, you say you're going to let the next generation to determine that. Well, we cannot just keeping delaying this issue. You know, and it's our responsibility to deal with the problem, not the next generation's responsibility. And that's what most people, there are some people in Taiwan, they think, I mean, that's wrong. Especially when their son and daughters, you know, are American citizens, and they could easily, you know, get in power, and then they can. Well, I'm not saying they will sell out Taiwan. I'm not saying that. I'm saying there's a possibility that they would do things that not in favor of the Taiwanese, and that's why a lot of people, you know, vote for DPP instead of KMT.
Because they think that they might work out a deal to eventually sell out the country.
Well, they might work out a deal, but I'm not saying they will sell out the country. I'm saying they might work out a deal that would put Taiwan's sovereignty into jeopardy. Okay, because they don't care that much about the sovereignty of Taiwan. It appears to be that way. Okay.
So you're afraid they might do something that's just best for themselves, like get some financial gain out of it, and then just live in the United States?
That's one possibility. I'm not saying definitely they would do that. Okay, but what I'm saying that could be one of the possibility. Okay, remember on December 28th of this year, we have about 2 million people. February 28th.
Yeah.
Okay, this to commemorate the 228 instance in 1947. So there were about 2 million people joined hands from the north part of Taiwan to south part of Taiwan. And this was organized by President Lee, the former president. And at that time, he also invited KMT's candidates to join in. Okay, but KMT candidates didn't join in. And basically, so that gave the people an impression they don't care about the threat from China. Okay, and one of the reasons people want to do that was to show China that we are not afraid of threat. Okay, I mean, even though there are more than 400 missiles targeting us, but we are not afraid. But the thing was, they didn't join in, and then they had a campaign office in Shanghai. So that gave the people impression, you know, they have certain connection with the Chinese government, you know, and they do not really want to stand up, you know, for Taiwan's sovereignty.
Do you know why they didn't participate?
Well, maybe they thought it was President Chen's campaign strategy. something to do with that. They have a blood drive, on the same day, but instead of joining people to protest against China, they're afraid doing that. They're afraid. They're afraid of showing their resentment against Chinese government, I think.
But don't you think that could be because they want to have good relations with China? Maybe that's why they didn't participate.
Well, that's one possibility. But then for some Taiwanese people, that give a wrong message, because the only way we can stop war is to show them that we are not afraid of war. Okay, and if you look at history, during before World War II, when Hitler attacked Poland, and everyone said, well, we want to have a good relation with Hitler. We let them have Poland, but then see what happened. They make a war, wars, and ends up, the United States had to fight a bigger war. But then, in the same way, in my opinion, I think the only way that we can prevent war is to be prepared for a war. We are not saying we're going to antagonize China, but at least we should show them we are not afraid of the threat. Okay, but KMT's policy is, instead of standing up for Taiwan sovereignty, they say they don't want to deal with sovereignty. They don't do whatever Chinese. Well, they say, well, we should negotiate with China. Well, the only way we can negotiate with China is to recognize Taiwan's part of China, which is not acceptable for most Taiwanese people. Taiwan is not part of China. Taiwan is a different country. It's a different country from China. And the only way we can prevent war is to show them that we are not afraid of fighting a war. And in a way, if you look at history, when the war will happen, when one side is weak and has no determination to fight against the other side, and that's how war started. You can just look into history, and that's why we want to stand up against China's threat. That's why we had 2 million people, hand join hand and want to stand up against China's threat. But then KMT didn't want to join in because they were afraid of, and I think they're probably afraid of antagonizing China, and that in most people's mind that give a wrong message to China.